Hello, this is Andrew with UberCrit, and I am joined by Jimmy Ellerth, the creator of Hero, Tales of the Tomes. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. Yeah, doing good.
Good. I wanted to sit here and ask you some questions regarding the game, the mechanics of it, how you came up with it, and everything else. But I'll ask the first question I ask everybody else so far when I've been doing these interviews is I am a big card game player.
Mhm.
I was a semi-pro Hearthstone player. I just want to ask why a card game as one of your creations? Have you always been into TCGs?
Yeah,
What made you want to make this in particular as like your game?
I have always loved card games growing up, whether they be, physical card games or digital TCGs. I've played like pretty much every one that I could get my hands on that have come out. Whether it was, Yu-Gi-Oh stuff on the Game Boy, whether it was, Hearthstone, Magic, Pokemon. I've played, Star Wars and Dragon Ball TCGs and stuff like that. Love the whole game, but I always find card games just like a very particular bit of like strategy and thinking that you can apply that's just like very different and engaging to me than other types of games. I love video games and like board games all over. I originally was trying to get into like game design, worked on a couple startups, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of like other parts of this that are outside of my control. Like we ran out of funding, or like like 3D modeler wasn't able to like work on it or something. And I was like, hey, I love card games. I'm an artist myself. I can do this all from top to bottom and work on it until it's ready and release it. So that's what I did with Hero. So
Amazing. Speaking of, you mentioned there things out of your control. Is that why you made this game all by yourself?
yeah,
You were like a one-man band over there, did the artwork, made the game, did everything. Is that the main reason why?
yeah, that was definitely the main like motivator. I was like, this is something I can tackle myself at my own pace and like release it when I'm happy with it, and I don't have to rely on like other teams and stuff like that. I've gotten to the point where I'm very excited at the possibility of working with other people, other whether that be other designers, other artists, or other things. But that was definitely the initial thing that motivated me to do it. Was I was like, okay, I know I can do this from start to finish, and however long it takes me. And then it was just playtesting. So.
Right. So since it was just you, how was the development cycle for this? I can imagine that's both freeing and also like you might have to reel yourself in sometimes. So what was that cycle like for you?
Yeah, it originally the game started as my senior thesis in school, actually. It was a much more pared down basic thing. I was like, I'm gonna make just like a fantasy card game, 60 deck of cards kind of thing. And then didn't think about it much. And I went on like a trip with my family, and my siblings and I always like grew up playing card games together. And we were playing it a bunch. They were like, "This is really fun." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Like I think I could make this way better. So let's do it." So like about a year and a half later, I started all the play testing and stuff like that. We play tested it for about 5 years, just to get all the like the different game elements and everything right. Like the thing I really enjoy about being just myself is it's very freeing to be able to be like, this mechanic is fine, but it doesn't feel like it's the best. So why don't we try just throwing it out and trying something totally different, whether that be a card mechanic or just like way things function, like the hero abilities and stuff like that. It's really freeing to be able to be like, we can try something totally different and play test it as long as we want to see if it works. And then once I got to the game to the point where I was really happy with it, I spent the like year and a half doing all the art for it, went to Kickstarter, and I've been going around to shows and stuff ever since promoting it, working on the next expansions.
Amazing. So yeah, you did Kickstarter back in 2018.
Yes.
Um, do you find yourself now that we're here in 2024 that you are sort of naturally starting to add in what you consider to be stretch goals back in 2018? Like is that something you were just naturally wanting to do as time goes on, or how has that been?
I've definitely like learned from like being able to be playing the game for so long. Like originally when you start off, it's like, okay, what do I just think might be fun? And then like from just years of playtesting, I'm like, okay, now I can understand better like what works well in this game system. And like originally I was thinking like, oh, I'll just release expansions that are just like additive cards and stuff like that. And one of the things I'm really excited to once I came to this conclusion for Reign of the Onyx King is that it's going to be completely standalone. So like that's what I think is most fun about Hero is that it being this one box buy where it's just a card game that you can set up really easily and play whenever. And I want all the expansions to mirror that. So it's just like, hey, new characters, new cards, you can combine them however you want. But if it's your first thing, if like that's the setting that like really piques your interest, you can just start with that or combine them any way you want. Like I want it to be a really freeing experience away from kind of the trappings that I find in TCGs because I feel like the versions of them that I enjoyed the most was when it was just like kitchen table, like kind of games, whether that be playing with my family or my friends growing up. And then once I explored more like competitive avenues, I found like some of the certain aspects of the genre to be like really like restricting, either like the idea of like the creativity being sapped away by like concepts of like net decking and stuff like that, or just like the cost that it takes to just like continue playing or keep up with the game and stuff like that. So I was like, can I make something that like scratches this itch for me while like removing some of those trappings that I find? So I'm hoping that I can do that with Hero and with Reign of the Onyx King and future stuff. And I have lots of different things in mind. I'm hoping to explore them down the line.
Do you expect Hero to be an evergreen title? What I mean by that is, do you expect over time to continually add to it? Or do you think at some point it'll come to a natural conclusion since you have been working on it since 2018? Do you have any sort of like estimations there or expectations, I should say?
I still expect to be able to work on it for a long time. I mean, the thing that I have my current scope is to have it be instead of it just being releasing new cards, these standalone expansions are releasing new game modes as well. So it's me exploring avenues of like, hey, what is, what does a like a boss mode style cooperative thing look like? That's what I'm exploring with Randy King. What's something that's full cooperative or solo play or roguelike? I have like lots of different ideas that I'm interested in exploring and making all the expansions do those kind of game mode expansions rather than me just saying like, here's more cards, and then I may eventually get like burnt out of that. Like I have lots of things in mind. I hope to be able to work on Hero for a long time and make it be like that sort of evergreen title, like you said.
Got it. So I saw as a bit of an aside, just because I'm curious here now, I saw in an interview you did that you mentioned that you are a big League of Legends fan, or you were at one point in your life. I'm just curious, who's your main?
Well, League and Dota were definitely my biggest inspirations. I think I've moved more into Dota now, but like as far as
Okay.
League goes, I was definitely into Evelyn and Nunu. I think they've changed so much since I was playing them regularly. I don't know if that's what I'll be judged for based on saying that. But yeah, lots of different. I was playing back in like 2012, 2013 was when I was playing really heavily with it. Evelyn was a big go-to for me. Nunu was, and then like that, like kind of hero system is what inspired me a lot, and like champion system inspired me a lot for Hero Tales of the Tomes was because I wanted something where like the game we're playing is the same every time, but like what our hero combinations and choices are, what our teams are, how we're interacting with each other. That's what adds a lot of the nuance and balance and stuff like that. Like I have ideas for like, oh, if it's down the line and we eventually have like 20 or 30 heroes. Maybe it's something where like you do a sort of like mini draft at the start where you're like banning and picking heroes for the game that you're playing. Like I love that kind of stuff. It's what I really enjoyed about League and Dota. So
Would you ever, if the resources were given or the time, would you ever consider turning Hero into a digital card game, like something that
yeah,
would be released on
absolutely.
Steam?
Absolutely, 100%. I'm working with someone right now who's helping me create a more web-based version of my like health tracker app, and I always have ideas for how we can expand that to make it more immersive and eventually go into like a digital version. But just I'm trying to stick to uh, my guns that I had originally. Like I said, like I don't know how to code or program at all, but I know how to like draw and do the card game design stuff. So I'm sticking to that. And like if it eventually comes along where we get big enough where I can afford something like that, I would love to make a digital version of the game. Absolutely.
Fair enough. So getting actually into the game and some of the mechanics I had questions about. Um, the mana system is sort of like a combination, I think, of what makes all the best card games fun. I love the idea of being able to level up as you go and have that just happen naturally. And also the mana system being kind of akin to Hearthstone, I think is kind of the one-to-one there. What was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, so from its inception, I originally had them being separate as your level, resource, and your mana being separate pools that you play from. I just think I really enjoyed that way, being able to make the spells and abilities have mana costs associated with them, and everything else having level requirements, so that the progression for level based cards was more linear, and the progression for mana based cards was more based on your like hero or your class. So that way, I could be like, okay, mages can play really expensive spells really early and rely on that for a lot of their like punching power, where the level based cards can be more linear and more like fair, I guess, but I don't have to worry about like ramping things or like making a mage character suddenly playing a lot of like equipment or companion based cards. Like I wanted there to be that delineation. And I've really enjoyed how it works. I feel like it makes a really fun balance. And also this thing of like, if you were playing Hearthstone or Magic and someone had like 20 mana, you'd be like, this is insane. It's unfair. They can do whatever they want. But like, because the cards you can play with certain types are restricted, it makes someone like super ramping in one direction, not necessarily mean like they're overpowered completely throughout the entire game. So it can create an interesting balance scenario with that as well.
Right, I agree. I can tell just from your comment, and it's totally fine, obviously. You have not played Hearthstone in a while. Druid can get up
Oh,
to
I know.
20 mana now.
I know they can get up to 20 mana, yeah. But imagine if they
Okay.
can get to 20 mana on like turn 3 or whatever.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like I hate Druid. Delete them from the game, please.
Yeah.
Um, one of the
Hey, at
things
least Guff is rotated for now, so that's
oh,
not
I
something
agree.
to worry about.
Do you still play standard as of now?
I
Like,
I follow a lot, but I don't play on the regular, but I watch tons of content for it. So I'm always keeping up with standard and
got
everything.
it.
So
Right. I love Raren. Raren kind of brought me back into the game. I used to play Hearthstone a ton and then stopped for a while and recently came back. Anyway. One of the things I found interesting about Hero was the fact that there are no phases. When games like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh, there are like very individualized phases. Like this is when you can play cards. This is when you attack. Was that just for to make it more easy? I know you've said in interviews that this game is you want it to be like almost an introductory to card games. It was that sort of the reason why to take that basic element out, I suppose.
I think Hero has a lot of depth to it. I don't think it's an easy game. I think I tend to say that it's introductory because I think it's very easy to jump into. There's so much less baggage of like, hey, you don't have to know how to build a deck. You don't have to know how to collect stuff. We can just put this down. You can get the basics of how we're interacting with each other with spells. I think the reason that the phases work the way they do is just a lot of the questions I asked myself was like when I was learning Yu-Gi-Oh, when I was learning Magic, what were the things that made me be like, why does that work that way? And Yu-Gi-Oh was my first, and I remember starting with that being like, oh, okay, cool. I can choose what I'm attacking and deal damage to it, and then going to Magic being like, but I want to hit your thing. Why can't I hit your thing? You get to choose when I hit your thing. So I knew I wanted it to be this sort of like back and forth, one at a time kind of attacking cycle. So for me, that made me break it up more like the way Hearthstone works with being like, I have a companion out. I choose when I attack with it. And we just kind of trade blows that way. I think I just enjoyed like how fluid that was and with how much like interaction there is in the game between like abilities and quick cast spells. I felt like it was a bit too like rigid with sort of like an attack phase system.
Got it. Fair enough. Speaking of, I found it interesting. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I saw that is it true that players can attack on the first turn, like the
Mm-hmm.
very first time? How did you decide on that one? That one seems very like I feel like of all card games, aside from maybe Hearthstone, that seems to be like the golden rule almost, is that you don't really attack on the first turn unless some sort of you know, witchery happens. How did you decide that?
I think for me, it just came from like it felt like too much of a deficit to not be able to attack. Because you start with a character, you always have someone who can attack in play. So it felt like saying like, "Hey, you're for going first. You can't do anything. You just have to get hit by everyone else." Felt a little bit um, unfair for that reason. And also, I designed the game primarily around 3+ players. My thought was that there are countless number of amazing card games for one-on-one gameplay, but I really enjoy the like things that happen in like multiplayer games. So I felt like, hey, if you're attacking first, um, you are often drawing first blood and making everyone mad at you. So now you're fighting a 1v2 or more or whatever it is. And because the heroes do not have standardized starting health, it's depending on what character that they have. I also, for that reason, found it to be like normally people just attack whoever has the highest health, not necessarily like who's, going first or second or whatever, things like that. I have like added some slightly different rules for playing one-on-one and stuff like that, and I'm experimenting with like different formats and things like that because I do find that to be most fair in the like 3+ player formats, and less so in like a one-on-one format because it is definitely an advantage. But there's all sorts of different ebbs and flows to the gameplay. Like I really enjoy how a lot of people when they first start playing, they're like, "Oh, going first is best because I can attack right away. I draw a card and I level up before everyone else does." But like, there's certain heroes where leveling up on not their turn lets them actually eke out extra like mana and resources and like cooldowns for abilities and stuff like that. So I think I really enjoy like watching people as they get more into the game, seeing those differences where it's not as straightforward as like, "Oh, I go first, so I attack first, so I win."
Fair. I so with every card game, it doesn't seem to matter how um words have escaped me today. It doesn't seem to matter what the intention was. People tend to want to create a competitive scene out of it. Is that something you would ever consider with your game, whether that be like tournaments or anything like that, or are you just like not so much?
Andrew, I would love to. I actually get the pushback in the reverse. I think a lot of people come to Hero and they're like, hey, I came to this because I don't want a hyper competitive format, which I love for the game too, which is fine. But I'm always, like I already said, thinking of things like drafting heroes. I've thought of things where you are creating more like deck building and stuff like that, if that was a form. Because I always think that's such a like beautiful form of like self-expression and like being creative is like building your own deck and deciding how it's going to work. And I do worry sometimes. I'm like, is Hero too limiting that way? But whenever I brought it up, people are like, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to build my own deck. I don't want to play competitive. And but I'm trying to work with certain groups so that at conventions we can at least try, playing the game the way it currently works, but just in a more of like a bracket tournament kind of way to see if people would enjoy that because I've always really enjoyed those competitive types of environments. So we'll see if it eventually gets that way. But it's funny how much I get the opposite pushback of people being like, "Nah, not really." I'm like, okay. So
That's honestly that's great to hear though. As someone who I find it hard to almost play card games casually now, as someone who's been playing for so long. Like I got into Lorcana, and I really, really enjoy it, but I also just have a hard time wanting to just play casually. Like I want to
yeah.
go to tournaments and other things. Um, so one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about, sort of away from the game and kind of the background of it. Um, I noticed that you are selling on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Mhm.
And how was the process of getting into Barnes and Noble? Was it just as simple as like shooting them an email? Did you have to go to business meetings? It's also completely fine if you don't want to talk about that. I was just very curious from like a business aspect.
Yeah, it was super serendipitous. Like I met the my connections for my like distributor and the Barnes and Noble rep at Gen Con one year. And they were like, hey, we're just looking for things to slate into our like fall 2023 catalog. And right now I'm just in their test market. I think my game is a little bit too niche for honestly like wide spectrum Barnes and Noble. But we'll see if it ends up getting more popular with the new Kickstarter and everything like that. It's who's to say. I don't think like kind of Barnes and Noble is where it will stay forever. I do think like my game doesn't have a lot of big box store appeal for like Barnes and Noble or Target or Walmart or things like that. But I do think it has like very fitting home in like hobby shops and things like that. And Amazon is honestly more so just for convenience. Like if you don't have your product on Amazon, it kind of makes it just invisible. Um,
Right, I
but yeah,
agree.
yeah, it was really just kind of a luck of the draw kind of thing to
Got
encounter
it.
that person there.
So it wasn't even necessarily something that you were aiming for. It was kind of the pieces just fell in place.
Yeah, because there's something where I was like, oh, there's no way this will happen or work. And then I just met the person and they're like, we can just give it a try. And I was like, cool. And we gave it a try. And I'm feeling after like it's been close to a year now. And I'm thinking just it'll probably not be a permanent fixture unless things like change in like kind of the scene or reception of just people going to Barnes and Noble. So
Got it. Fair enough. So as we wrap up here, as they said, you can purchase it on Amazon or right now, as of recording, Barnes and Noble. But where can people find you to get updates about the game and the franchise as a whole and everything along those lines?
yeah, so at talesofthetomes.com, we have all our different social links at the bottom there, as well as links to our upcoming Kickstarter, our Patreon page, and things like that. That'll give you kind of all the know-how of when the next Kickstarter is coming out and the new expansion. And I post to like Twitter and Instagram and stuff frequently for art updates and everything as I'm working on things. So
Got it. Thank you so much for doing this, bud. I appreciate
yeah,
you.
thanks, appreciate it too.
Bye.